Hello and welcome to Ahead of the Curve, the podcast from Acadia, where we take time to get under the skin of the risk, margin and collateral industry to dig deep and present topical perspectives and insights on this hugely important sector. In this edition of Ahead of the Curve, we're back on camera and welcoming back into the studio Acadia's CEO, Chris Walsh. So, Chris, it's great to see you again.
John, it's great to see you too. I'm excited to be here.
Well, it's always a pleasure to have you in the studio, and we've got some really interesting ground to cover in this podcast. So pleased that you could join us for this conversation. Now, since the first episode of Ahead of the Curve, we've been on a journey. We've followed the 6 phases of implementation of uncleared margin rules, culminating in phase 6 that was in September just last year. The introduction of uncleared margin rules has provided the over-the-counter derivatives industry with an essential level of structure and guidance. But although we've reached phase 6, the story's not over. A process of mainstreaming UMR rules is now underway. Market participants have made it clear that they require a more holistic approach towards risk, margin, and collateral management. And this fundamental shift in the industry has brought about the need for something new, and it's called optimal margin management. So what does optimal margin management, or OMM, what does it mean for all of us? Chris, you're with me in the studio to discuss this. So let's start at the basics, start from the top. Why is OMM, optimal margin management, why is it so important?
Well, first I have to tell you, John, about how we came up with the name.
Yes, no, give me that.
Right? We went through everything we could think of. The name is really came together between ourselves and Quaternion Management as part of Acadia, talking about where clients are heading right now. And they're heading towards, there's a lot of different optimization processes going on in the market. And sometimes it's optimizing collateral to reduce funding costs. Other times you're looking at optimizing portfolio to reduce IM exposure or optimizing process. And we took a look at that and we thought a little bit about what's going on in our business and with our clients. And we felt that the idea of bringing these together around the client's core margin process would ultimately be the best outcome for our clients. And we put together a framework around that we've been most recently discussing with a number of clients, and it's really resonating well.
And is it something that was being asked for? Is it a question of Acadia looking at the market and realizing this is needed? Or were these conversations you were having with clients and it was clear that that was what they're looking for?
It's very clear that the clients are looking for it, but the conversations weren't all the same. Some came from one part of the business or another part of the business, optimizing a different constraint or a different concern. However, everyone realized that unless you look at it more holistically, okay, you're solving one problem and possibly causing others at the same time. So our view is you take a holistic approach. You include the multiple constraints you need to optimize around. You build it into your core risk and collateral process. And that's where you're going to get your best outcome.
And that, I suppose, essentially is what OMM is about, isn't it? That holistic approach you described, bringing all of those elements together, disparate perhaps as they were before, and bringing them together in a more accessible and understandable way for the client.
Yeah, and it's critical right now. I'd say right now clients are faced with a situation where they've complied with the rules, or anyone who's in scope has complied with the rules. But for many clients, they're posting way more collateral than they need to. Okay, and based on our calculation and our assumption that in our initial analysis that said some clients up to 40% of their are posting 40% more than they ultimately need to.
And that's collateral they could do more with.
They're locking up a lot of their assets unnecessarily. We take a look. We apply just a 20%. A kind of over collateralization across our client base. We're looking at a significant $22 billion, of spending that's happening on an annualized basis that wouldn't need to be.
That's a chunk of change, Chris.
Significant chunk of change.
And is that then one of the aspects of OMM? It's about getting a hold of this and stopping that overspend, for want of a better word. That's certainly that level of collateralization.
Absolutely. So, exposure's not being optimized isn't the end of the story. Okay, funding costs at the same time, funding those exposures with collateral, okay, is getting more expensive for firms. In many cases, that's because the volatilities have increased, but also because interest rates are now up. But our analysis shows some clients are increasing their funding costs by 150%, okay, just over the past year.
I guess another factor that comes into play here is that UMR is no longer simply a project that participants have to navigate. It's I guess it's more business, and you've used this phrase yourself before, Chris. It's the new business as usual.
It is, and many people have started mentioning Phase 7. Okay, now there is no Phase 7.
Should we be bracing for a Phase 7, Chris? Is this on the horizon?
I think Phase 7 is being referred to enough right now that it kind of exists. But Phase 7 really is a realization that when Phase 6 is done, there's an ongoing body of work. And I think one of the challenges clients have is they've approached this as a project. Most everyone has formed project teams, developed those teams, and disband those teams at once Phase 6 was completed. But there's a lot of ongoing responsibility every firm has to stay in compliance. And if they don't, they run the risk of falling out of compliance and not being able to trade in a given agreement or with a given client. That includes monitoring thresholds for all of your clients, not just those in scope, to see who is and isn't in scope. Annual ANA calculations have to be performed. SIM recalibrations have to be performed. And trading as a whole needs to become more sensitive to the impacts of margin and use tools like pre-trade analytics so that they can best direct trades in a way that's going to really allow the clients to optimize their assets.
Let's just go into this in even more detail. Take me through the process when it comes to the framework of optimizing, validating, and enabling. What should participants expect?
Well, I think step one is measuring where they're at. Okay, and I really look at that through the lens of optimizing. Understand how much am I overexposing? How much am I over collateralizing today? And why? Okay, is there an opportunity? Analyzing that with other constraints like SACR and other capital requirements that a firm might have, and understanding how that can be best dealt with through on a trade by trade basis through pre-trade analytics, or looking at different options for doing optimization runs, different ones that are available through Acadia and through the industry right now. But that whole area of optimizing is a place that firms should be looking when they're looking, particularly when they start looking at how do they reduce their exposures and the potential overspend there. Okay, it's second area that you'd be looking at is validating. Okay, and that validation, for some firms, they're going to be forced to validate. Their models are going to be required to be validated. They're going to have back testing requirements. Okay, other firms that may not fall into the scope to need that still need to take a look at their ongoing validation of their monitoring. Where they stand against thresholds, where they stand in terms of the ANA calculations, how the recalibration of SIM is likely to impact them year on year. Looking at maybe some volatility spikes that happen in the current year. But there's a whole area of managing and validating, how you're operating within UMR. That's that second piece there. Okay, the enabling, when we look at enabling, we really look at a lot of enabling comes through as data. Okay, do I have a good representation of trades? Do I have a good representation of my agreements? Is it in sync with my counterparties? How do I bring those in sync, and how do I improve the data that all these processes are working on? And then last, we take a look at the integration. Okay, have I implemented IM in a way that it's separate from VM, and is it inefficient as a result of that? Okay, are there opportunities for me to better connect? Are there opportunities for me to better handle my settlement communication? Am I still sending faxes around some of these exchanges? As simple as that. But looking at all of these items and picking, where do I approach this, and developing that roadmap and implementing around it.
I have to ask just quickly on that one, Chris, are people still sending faxes? Are there the odd client out there still doing that?
Believe it or not, there's some processes. And it's really a legacy to how this business operates. And it really marks one of the real reasons that we want to introduce some change in that. Okay, not just to eliminate the need for faxes, but the real reason people implement faxes is that the business is defined by a set of agreements that no one wants to change. And if within that agreement it says, you shall send a fax, it's not worth spending the month arguing with lawyers about changing that, sending that fax. You're going to send a fax. But if you converted that to digital terms, okay, that can be changed between parties and updated as needed, that problem, there would be no logic to sending a fax, because it would be very simple for someone to say, yes, I'll receive an electronic message from you.
It's fascinating, isn't it? How we can become locked in one method and means of doing something for so long as well. Look, I want to ask one more question on this, and it's around Acadia's approach, Chris. Optimal margin management, it's an Acadia initiative. It's your baby, and it's something that we've been discussing for this podcast. What is it that defines Acadia's approach to all of what you've just described when it comes to OMM?
Yeah. I think OMM for Acadia represents the coming together of quantitative analytics with operational workflow. Acadia's we've been doing this for the past 5 years, and ever since we executed on the acquisition of Quaternion to develop that quantitative capability within the company. Bringing those two together is wholly important. It's what we saw mostly with phase five, and then phase 6, when firms needed to start doing risk calculations and include that in their margining process. Okay, now what we're in a position to do, and clients are in a position to do or work with us to do, is holistically look at the process, both the quantitative calculations, the analytic side of what's happening around risk, and the collateral management, margin management, settlements around the operations, and have a single solution front to back. So Acadia can now offer that. It can be a one-stop provider and an integrated solution provider, unlike I believe anyone else in the market.
So exciting times ahead then, Chris.
Absolutely.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure having you in the studio, joining us for this video-recorded edition of the podcast. We're out of time, though, Chris. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Always love coming here, John. Thank you.
That's a pleasure. And thank you for listening and for watching Ahead of the Curve. We'd like to know what you think, so please do get in touch and share your thoughts. And you can find out more about Acadia by going to Acadia Inc. But until next time, it's goodbye from us.